Hello, good morning. My name is Dr. Justice Baole. I'm going to be your tutor for this course, PAHS 305, Management of NGOs. You know that the world has a lot of pressure. Globally, governments are becoming unable to respond to the needs of society. And as a result of that, the role of third sector organizations, organizations that do not function and receive support entirely from government, have become a commonplace phenomenon. So you are likely to go everywhere in the village, everywhere in the world, and then you would find that there are NGOs working and doing a lot of work. In this session, I'm going to take you through what NGOs are and what it is that they do. We would identify some features of NGOs that will help you to be able to identify one when you find. And of course, that will help you to be able to establish what you need to do if you have to create NGO. I should say that the key essence of this program or this course is to make sure that students are able to understand what it takes to work for an NGO, but even more importantly, that students are able to establish or create an NGO of their own and to be able to run them. So often we will say this is a very practical course, and so you will be required to take particular attention, pay particular attention to the key practical elements that we are going to be going through. So in this session, we are going to take you through this introductory part of what an NGO is and what NGOs do. And so by the end of this session, we expect that you should be able to explain what an NGO is, and you should be able to mention the key features of an NGO and to classify NGOs based on either their locality or based on their function or based on the kind of role that they play. So what is it that is an NGO? Oftentimes you have different terms that are used to refer to this category of organizations in different jurisdictions. If you come to Ghana, we call them NGOs. Other parts of the world, they refer to them as private voluntary organizations. In some places, they call them third sector organizations. In other places, they call them voluntary sector organizations, or charity or charitable organizations, or philanthropic organizations. In some places, they call them foundations. What they do are that these are body of organizations that are often formed by people who are independent of the state. So we say that an NGO is a voluntary organization or a body of persons, whether corporate or unincorporated, which is non-political, non-partisan, non-profit making, and which aims at improving the quality of life of the inhabitants of a particular area. And this definition that I just gave you is a definition that the Attorney General of Ghana actually put together in 1993. Now, as we go, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the features that have been mentioned in this definition and whether or not I agree with all of the features that have been mentioned. For example, we insist that NGOs should be non-political, they should be non-partisan, but we don't think that it's possible for NGOs to be non-political. And that is because what politics is about is the key essence of survival, the key essence of people's ability to live. And so we say NGOs should be non-partisan. In other words, they should not identify with a particular political party. So you cannot have an NDC NGO or an MPP NGO, but you can have an NGO that identifies with a particular political issue. For example, we just recently been told of free HHS, where the government says people who go into secondary school will not pay fees. Some NGOs can identify with this issue and advocate for it. It doesn't make them political in the sense that this definition tries to portray them. We also say NGOs should not be profit-making. And again, here we insist that when we say NGOs should not be profit-making, it doesn't mean that they cannot make profit. But what it means is that they cannot be set up purposely to make profit. So you can have an NGO that is set up to make, to provide community service in some form, but this NGO can make a side activity that will generate some income that can be used to support the activities that they do. So the essence of non-profit making feature is that NGOs should not be set up purposely to make profit. Otherwise, they become profit organizations. Otherwise, they become like any private entity that is set up to make profit. For example, MTN, for example, Vodafone, and all of that. And so we say NGOs should not be set up purposely to make profit, but that doesn't mean that they cannot make profit. So they can make profit from side activities, and they will channel those profits into the activities that they are doing and all of that. And we say in the end that the NGO's role should be to improve the standard of living of the people. So if the activity of the NGO does not support or improve the quality of life of a particular people, then we say it cannot be an NGO. You would also find a couple of other definitions, various definitions about NGOs that you can look at in your manual and in the slides that you'll be provided with. NGOs, we say they should be partially formalized. In other words, every NGO should have a structure. An NGO cannot exist in the pocket of somebody. Not long ago, we had some NGOs that didn't have an office, that didn't have a place of operation. Nobody knew them. It was just one person with his portfolio, and he walks around and calls himself an NGO. We discourage that category of NGOs, and we say an NGO should have a structure. An NGO should have an identity. An NGO should have a location. An NGO we should be able to identify them such that if anybody intended to pass on some resources to them so they are able to do some work, it should be possible for us to identify them. And of course, the people who are going to be benefiting from that NGO should then be able to identify who they are getting the support from. And so we say NGOs should have some key features, including what we just talked about. So what are these features that I just talked about that we would usually want NGOs to have? We say NGOs should be founded by private individuals. In other words, NGOs cannot be founded by a government. A government should not establish an NGO. Why? Because we say they should not be partisan. So if a particular party establishes an NGO, it will be difficult for it to be independent. And you know, for example, in Ghana, where you have a lot of people who are chronically supportive of a particular government, you know that if anybody were to form an NGO and come to the community, some people might even refuse to receive the support that this NGO that is formed by the government has. So we also say NGOs should be independent of the state. In other words, they should not be dependent on the state to get money. However, in some jurisdictions outside of Ghana, NGOs often get support in terms of funding from government. But when that is done, they are supposed to account for the monies that they get. In our part of the world, in Ghana and many other developing countries, that is not the case most of the time. We say NGOs should be oriented towards the rule of law. In other words, NGOs cannot engage in things that are unlawful. And therefore, when we talk about this, I usually use the example of organizations such as Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram, which are organizations that do not obey the law and are causing mayhem to other parts of the world. We cannot classify them as NGOs because they don't obey the rule, the laws of the states and of course, the international community. And we say NGOs should pursue public interest rather than private interest. In other words, NGOs cannot be set up just to take care of the interests of the person who established it. And when I say this, I have to make the exemption that when we classify NGOs, and we'll look at that at some point, when we classify NGOs, we have what we call service organizations, and we have what we call voluntary organizations and membership organizations. So service organizations are those organizations that provide service to other people. Membership organizations are those that provide services to their own members. So for example, I belong to the University Teachers Association of Ghana, UTAG. And UTAG is an NGO that is established for the interests of members. So UTAG would have the responsibility to address the interests of members, as against, for example, Oxfam, that is an NGO, but that is established to help other people. But we say that even where NGOs are membership organizations and meant to address the interests of the people, that interest should not be at the expense of the public. So we cannot just meet the interests of UTAG members and say that we don't care whatever happens to the rest of the world. In other words, we should be mindful of what we give to the rest of the world as well. And we say NGOs should have some minimum structure. I talked about that earlier. So that is what NGOs are supposed to be. And these features that we mentioned are elaborated in your slides slightly longer. So you can pick up that also and be able to see. Well, one of the things that we talk about usually when we talk about NGOs would for you to understand, especially the point that I talked about, that NGOs cannot be profit making. We always want students to note that these days there are changes in the NGO terrain. And we have some NGOs that are now called social enterprises. And these social enterprises are set up to make profit, but they are set up to make profit with a mission to help society. So they make profit, but they channel all the profit into the activities of the NGO. So NGOs can make profit, but they cannot distribute profit like profit organizations do. They cannot declare dividend at the end of the year and send that money to its shareholders. NGOs don't do that. So what they do is to generate resources to help to promote the ideals that it's established or they stand for. NGOs can be classified into several forms. For example, there are NGOs that are national NGOs that cover the entire country. So if you take an organization like Challenging Heights. Challenging Heights is a child rights organization that rescues children who are in child labor. They set up a center of rehabilitation, and then they take these children there and they group them, they get them some psychological advice, and then they take them into schools. It operates only in Ghana. So we call such organizations national NGOs. But NGOs can also be international, where they have offices in many parts of the world. So for example, if you take Oxfam, if you take Plan Ghana, if you take World Vision, they have offices across the world. In fact, for most of these international NGOs, they have budgets as big as budgets of particular countries. So some NGOs, because they are international and they command a lot of resources, they can even be bigger than some countries in some parts of the world. So we have international NGOs, but we also have community-based NGOs or associations. So you go to many communities and you get church groups, you get associations, women's groups, you get trade associations, for example, seamstress associations. These are community-based organizations. You can have farmer-based organizations, Cocoa Farmers Association in Sefiwi also, for example, or you have rice farmers in Tolong, for example, and these are small groups of people who put themselves together to deal with a particular community problem. And we call such organizations community-based organizations. So you can classify NGOs within this kind of classification. And this is just the geographical classification. You can also have classifications of NGOs according to their geographical, according to the functions that they perform. So for example, you can have human rights NGOs, you can have NGOs that deal with issues of environment, you can have NGOs that deal with education and what have you. So that is what in this session we are meant to talk about. In other words, we will be requiring you to understand that when we talk about NGO, it means organizations that are established to help society, and that they are formed by private individuals and they are not dependent on government, especially in our context, and that they are organizations that are there to serve the interests of people and not the interests specifically of the people who established it. And therefore, this brings us to the end of this session. We want you to take a look at some activities that are provided under this slide. So for example, we want you to go through it and see if you can mention some NGOs in the name of some NGOs in Ghana, and mention 5 things that NGOs, what makes NGOs different from other organizations. We want you to be able to mention some activities that NGOs have carried out in Ghana. Look around your community, and of course for you to be able to explain what the importance of NGOs are. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next session. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you.